Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by Monica Crawford. Monica, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So Monica is a law enforcement officer. She is the owner of 50 Fierce and Fit. She's the author of Thriving Inside the Thin Blue Line. That's a pretty sweet resume.
I'd like to think so, but it's just kind of how life came at me.
I'm excited for this conversation for several reasons. I frequently talk about kind of my journey into law enforcement, and I found that a lot of the episodes that really resonate with folks are individual journeys, and a lot of those they're filled with a lot of adversity, right? And we talk about health and wellness a lot. We talk about the stress and trauma. But one thing that's resonating with me that a lot of people are relaying back as far as followers or listeners, whether it's the social or whether it's the show, is the fact that they feel like certain systemic things or certain organizational things or just people and personalities were getting in the way of them just trying to do the thing that they're trying to do. A lot of that adversity, which to me, when I zoom way out, is just us fighting ourselves as a police culture. I got to read your book and I see a lot of that. And so I appreciate the fact that you're sharing that. You put out that you're trying to help a lot of women in law enforcement with their lifestyle, with their fitness and their wellness, coming from that having to figure it out yourself. And I think that that's so impactful for people.
Yeah. So getting into law enforcement, it wasn't really a linear journey. I graduated with a master's in criminal justice from Bowling Green State University. When I got out of college, I was originally thinking somewhat of the law school route. Found through schoolwork that I don't think it seemed at the time that being a lawyer was very repetitive and almost mundane, because what I saw was inside of a municipal court, which was in Ohio. So municipal court up there is all misdemeanors, so I wasn't really seeing the felony side of things either. So they kind of steered me into a different route. And from there, I decided I wanted to stay in the court system and work with the courts. And so I weaseled my way in through the probation office that was at a municipal court in town, working with them. Kind of sidestepped my first full-time job was in mental health. So that's where that background and kind of compassion comes from for people in mental health crisis, because I was a case manager for them for a year. And then found my way back into the criminal justice side of things, working as a pre-sentence investigator for a common pleas court there in Ohio. Shortly after I decided I didn't want to stay in Ohio anymore, I moved to Tulsa. I like warmer weather by nature. I had to get out of the cold from up in the Toledo area. Moved back to Tulsa, being originally from Kansas City, Missouri, so I'm not too far from home there.
Okay.
But when I moved to Tulsa is when I found myself in my first sworn law enforcement position, and that was also with state probation and parole. But here they hold a commission. They go through the police academy like everybody else does. So I worked a different side of law enforcement, more of like the back end of the process, for about 2 or 3 years, and then found myself moving to patrol and going to the police side of things after that.
Yeah, that's a different route, and I love that you kind of saw these different angles leading you to your ultimate thing. How did you find that helpful? Because I do know and interact with a lot of people that have come in recently to law enforcement, or people that are trying to crack into it, and maybe they're not ready for that thing. Maybe they're not old enough, or maybe they recognize that they need more experience to make themselves stand out. There are people that come from like a paralegal background, and then they get bit by reading some of the reports and then visualizing themselves in that role. And so, what were some of the takeaways? Maybe some things that were helpful, or any advice you have for people that might be in similar shoes?
I mean, if you come from a background that's criminal justice or social work or psychology or sociology or anything that kind of follows under what was, I think we had our Health and Human Services department is what all that was. If you come from that background, I mean, I think we get into police and police get so narrow that we forget there's so many other things that relate to that fall under that same umbrella. And so I think it's great experience if you don't necessarily go straight into policing, because I found that I had a unique experience myself after working different full-time positions, I think for about 5, 6 years before I got into police. Um, those interactions helped because I had an understanding of the court system. I had already dealt with mental health people in crisis and dealing with individuals that were seeking mental health services. So I had a great background in dealing with those types of people, which are very common on the street, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just seeing the system from different sides, because you see somewhat of the front end from the courts, and then also the back end from the sentencing and the corrections side of things. But also, I saw the mental health part of it, and then kind of I was fortunate that probation and parole was a blend between the law enforcement and the courts, essentially. So I got a unique perspective where I had pretty much seen criminal justice almost like full circle from front to back.
And that's a good point. Even with the mental health background, I've had so many people when I was in hiring and recruiting, and then still now that they started down that path too, right? They wanted to work with mental health, they wanted to work with youth or people that are, I'll just say that they have a lot of challenges. And then they also see how law enforcement interacts and, man, I want to do that job in this way. And so I suppose this is my plug and any anecdote you may have, but when people ask what job they should get into or what background or degree they should pursue before they do law enforcement, I usually tell them to do what is most exciting and interesting to them, because I feel that you can build all these skills and all this knowledge that can help you in this job in so many ways, because it is so multifaceted. And there are so many people that come from education, from sociology, from psychology, from math and sciences, right? And some all these different things to be a specific type of cop or offer a specific type of insight to this crazy vast thing called law enforcement.
For sure. I had a female in my academy who was actually a CPA
Hmm.
before she came in, and you get into financial crimes and white collar crime. You never know what
Yeah.
that could help you out when you get that specific case. You have that specific experience to that. So
Yep. And if you know numbers, you'll be an absolute asset, because a lot of us cops are like, I'm in over my head. All right, so we'll cut, like, basically we're coming into your start of law enforcement, and I have your book right here in front of me. I made some notes and some things, if you don't mind, kind of jumped out at me that I'd kind of want to pick your brain about, or maybe just share with the listeners about so they can get a little tease and then maybe check out your book themselves. But the first chapter, Gil Martin in a Jar of Dirt, I've been thinking about and talking and writing about this, right? Where, hey, good on law enforcement culture for sharing this information in Academy, giving you a book and walking through it. But a lot of my takeaways more recently are reflecting back, including a recent article, but it's not enough. Like, we can say these things and pass it on, but we need to really instill this as part of our cultural practice, part of our team and leadership practice, and like how we do the job ongoing, because just getting this basic awareness of what may affect us and what will affect us is simply not enough. What are your thoughts on that, as far as like how we intro those conversations and continue them?
yeah, so this is my soapbox, and hope something I actually would like to do long term, big picture, is be able to come in and implement what I would call like an officer longevity program from application to retirement, where you bring in a more applicable fitness test that levels the playing field between men and women too, which helps
Mm,
encourage more women come in. You then build up on it in an academy. So you have a 16-week academy. So then you get the fitness programming for that 16-week academy. So by the time you get out, you're actually improving on your initial fitness tests and overall fitness. And then as a part of the academy setting, you're also learning the nutrition strategies you need, how to work out, how to create your fitness programs when you get out of the academy, and then more of like the even the lifestyle stuff behind the scenes. One of the biggest things I like to teach on is law enforcement is very structured. It's very like paramilitarized,
hmm.
and we know what we're doing and when. But then all of a sudden, when we leave and we go 10/7, get off the clock, and all of a sudden it's personal life, and we're like, what do we do? Like
Hmm.
there's no structure to our personal life, and we never learn like how to establish structure off the clock. So
Yeah,
that's another
yeah,
one of those small like nuance things that I would love to throw in there, as far as like, here's how to manage your time, here's how to keep things balanced. As far as let's not get too far chained to the job where we can't get back out, where we're working 60-hour work weeks and eat, sleep, work, repeat, because that's
yeah.
just a downward spiral that most people can't get out of. So giving more of those background, and of course mental health can always be much improved. and continuously improve, not hating on what we have now, but obviously it can always be better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, but adding that to the academy, and then you get out and then you have like your SOPs and policies and stuff where you have like your ongoing officer wellness program. Um, so you have a point of contact there that's like, hey, I'd like some help reaching a goal. Can you help me structure some nutrition and fitness maybe for the next month or two? Loosely have like that coaching relationship, but also like a mentorship type program where
Yeah.
it's genuinely focused around officer wellness from point A to point B, from the time you put your application in to the time that you retire. And that's what we don't have. Obviously, that's a big in picture goal, and we have a lot of work to get there. But most academies are not giving you anything when it comes to nutrition education, anything when it comes to fitness programming on how to work out. It's, hey, we're gonna kick your ass. Make sure you know how to fight. Hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
um, but what good does that do when you get out? Like I had an academy classmate who got out and we were kind of giving him a hard time, but at the same time, it's a problem. Like he gained 20 pounds in the first year, lost 20 pounds in the academy, and then gained it right back when he got out. And a year
Yeah.
later, we went to the next academy of graduation, and he couldn't fit in his class 8 uniform. And so it's all too common that you have
Yeah.
that where people might lose weight, they get in the academy, they have this very dialed in approach to fitness, or it's in a point where all of a sudden you work out 3 times a week, and all of a sudden it's 5 days a week for 6 months, and then it ends because then you don't know what to do on your own once it ends.
Yeah. There's so
So
much there. And
yeah,
yeah, I just want to cut back and forth a little bit because you said a lot of really impactful things, and I kind of want to dissect it for the listeners too, and kind of go back and forth with you because I think we need to explore some of this further. And one of the things is whether we talk about giving Gil Martin's book, and I said this in a recent interview, which is to say, hey, that's fantastic. Like we need to be sharing that and talking about it more. So this is not to disparage the good doctor. This is to say, just getting a book and scanning through it once in your career is simply not enough, right? This is really impactful stuff, even if it is, a veteran officer in roll call saying, hey, I'm realizing that I'm riding that roller coaster, right? That hypervigilance roller coaster. When I get home, I'm like zonking out, and we don't know really what to do with ourselves on our time off, and we're so exhausted. And there's these physiological reasons for that, and so maybe in the notion of like what good is information if you don't know how to apply it, maybe with that recognition is on my first day off, I'm going to like 9 times out of 10, 9 weeks out of 10 on my first day off, I'm going to do something that kind of rehabilitates me, right? I'm not going to set up a thing with my friends because I might be unplugged. I might be too just zonked out. I'm going to go hit the trails with my dog or whatever that thing is for you, right? Or I'm going to read, right? I'm just going to like get in my headspace and get myself right. For most of us, it's probably should be some sort of dedicated sleep with sleep hygiene so you can actually start recovering back. But that's one thing that popped in my mind, right? So it's like you can have the information, but then what do you do with it? And that's where it's fantastic that there are coaches like you that can walk through the nuances of this stuff. Because something else you said that popped in this idea of my mind is like we don't help officers in general, right? Every agency is different, every culture is different, but in general, we don't really help officers with their nutrition. And that is such a spider's web. Like that's so individualized, right? And so I would get super frustrated, and I actually don't really participate with my city's wellness because early on when I was trying it out, I would see all this really blanket kind of old like 90s information of like, yeah, just eat like more grains, like more grains for you. And I'm like, that's not helping most people. It definitely doesn't help me. So it's hard to maintain that credibility when you have this one size fits all. So I was just like, it's not for me. But what a bad attitude for me because I'll also say that there's a lot of good information in that program, like finance and you can keep going. But all to say, like, we need to be able to help people discern all the mess of information if we want our officers to be well and healthy.
yeah, I think that's where it gets lost. I mean, it's like, of course, we have our core blocks that we have to get into the academy, and that's like your job training, your on the job training and stuff. But it gets lost, like the officer wellness part. And I hate grouping it into officer wellness because it's such a big umbrella anymore. It kind
Yeah,
of gets
it's a lot.
kind of lost in that
Yeah.
term. Um, but keeping the health of the employee at a very basic level kind of gets pushed to the side. Um, Very much so in law enforcement and first responder fields. But then at the same time, we don't have the pieces in place within our departments to really assist with that, other than like, again, like you said, some are different, but for most people, it's like, well, we have an EAP. Okay, it's something that's good. Or you have like your yearly blood work or something where you can check a box and get an incentivized type of thing, kind of, I think
Mm-hmm.
like might be what you were referring to, similar to.
Yeah.
But even more so, I mean, you don't really have the incentivized things with like fitness much. Some people, some agencies do, where it's like, hey, pass the test and we'll give you an extra day off of work or something like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that feedback. Another note I made was just talking about the fitness test. A more applicable fitness test, I think, is like basically what you said. And I fully agree. I've said a lot of things, and I've written a lot about the different kind of standardized tests throughout the nation. Whether it's the Cooper test with the 300-meter run, mile and a half run, push-ups and sit-ups, right? Like I think most anyone who's spent some time, whether working out with a professional or in a sports background, or just figuring it out on their own via YouTube and just going to the gym, like knows that is not a standard you would really put towards anyone as far as like a regimen or a way to evaluate someone. So I'm glad more and more agencies are moving away from that. I don't know how many, but yeah, let's talk about that. So like more applicable, I want to get your thoughts on what that means to you and maybe some examples of types of movements or test exercises that you'd like to see. And I have a couple in my mind. I want to see if there's any crossover there.
So yeah, generically speaking, like the first thing that comes to mind is some sort of like a strength test, which for me, when you think about it, the first thing that comes to mind is like a deadlift. Um, Very basic skill. You need to be able to pick up and move people. You need to pick up and move equipment. It doesn't matter what you're doing, especially if it's a buddy drag, or especially if you're pulling somebody out of a building or out of a car, um, or anything like that. You got to be able to pick
Yeah.
up roughly 200 pounds, 200 to 250 pounds, is probably like the average person you're dealing with. If you're lucky, obviously you get some more on the higher end there. But I think of it as like, if you're going to level the playing field, for instance, between men and women, it's not who can lift the most, because you can have a 250-pound guy get up there and deadlift 500 pounds. Well, what if you get a 150-pound female that gets up there and deadlifts 200 pounds? So it becomes more of like a pound for pound type thing. Who's stronger
Okay.
pound for pound? With having, I think, and again, just kind of spitballing, because I'm sure some people might tear this apart, and that's okay. Um, Making it where you still have like a minimum standard.
Yeah,
Like
I
I
like
think
that.
it's a great. I think everybody should be able to pick up 200 pounds. I don't care how big you are. I don't care how small you are. I think that should be a requirement. I think
Hmm.
everybody that we deal with on the street is probably about 200 pounds.
Yeah.
And even more so if you're dealing with a coworker that's in full equipment and you got to
Yeah.
move them. So I'd
Yeah.
say even better off being like 250.
Mm, I like a lot of what
Uh,
you're saying. And you even said the buddy drag, right, as like an example. And this is where I was thinking, like, okay, if I had to do, or if I had to build a test, what kind of things would it incorporate? And I think it would incorporate a, a dummy drag, right? Because you scale it for life, and right, so I think that some people may have been thrown off when you said, hey, like, let's make it relative. Well, like, the world and the environment isn't relative. You get this call, like, you're this officer, you and me are going to this call, and we have to deal with this. But to your point, like, yeah, maybe establish a minimum, right? And maybe it's a pound for pound thing, because to your point, yeah, you could have a guy that deadlifts 500 pounds, but he might not be able to make it around a track in 5 minutes. So that's not the right, that's not the right mix, right? You want someone that can do multiple things. And to that point, like, if you had a dummy drag and you had to, hey, you got to get this dummy from here to there, you got like a bump over there, you got to go around this thing, like, you have to kind of navigate it. Some people might throw that thing on their shoulder and go, and other people will use primarily grip and leg strength and just drive, right? And just like kind of walk backwards. And I think however you do it, you're accomplishing the mission, right? If I'm a downed officer and I got male or female, 120 pounds, and can get me from point A to B behind cover in the required time, I'm down for it. Like, you
yeah,
sign you up for my team. But if you got a hulking guy that can throw me over his shoulder, but then collapses after 5 steps, like, cool, that's not really helpful to me because now we're both getting shot, buddy. So I
yeah,
like the idea of where you're kind of you have a aspect where you may be scaling, but then really it's just like, okay, here's the thing, you got to move this thing from here to there, or you have to get around from point A to B, you could jump over the fence, you could climb over the fence, or you could run all the way around, which is a bit farther over the fence because that's what life is. Rather than, let's say, the arbitrary 20, 25 push-ups. Like, what does that really show you can or you can do? And I don't think a whole lot, other than it shows you can put in a lot of time training push-ups and maybe even start tweaking your elbow, as I've seen a lot of people do, just because there's their physiology or prior injuries, but it doesn't preclude them from being able to do a lot of physical aspects that the job would require.
Yeah, so something like that. And the reason I say like the pound for pound type thing, and that would be more for like the testing process of like
Sure.
if you're trying to rank a male and a female, you're trying to make it somewhat of an equal way to rank somebody if
Mm-hmm.
you're ranking them on a leaderboard type of thing. Obviously, when it comes to job application, like everybody's got to be able to do the same thing. So that's kind of where I bring the pound for pound idea in, where it's like X female can lift X percent of her body weight, and X male is lifting X percent of his body weight type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it helps with the testing process a little bit.
Yeah,
But
that makes sense. I guess for me, I was like, Washington State, it's basically pass fail. So that makes more sense how you're putting it, like as far as like establishing sort of some sort of rank. Is that how it was out where you started?
no, unfortunately not.
Okay.
And we actually had, I talk about it in the book, but there was one specialty test where we did where the women were held to the men's weight and standards, and then
Yeah.
we all got ranked on the same leaderboard, which the women got thrown to the bottom.
Again, I mean, I think that's the point of why I've done these kind of mental exercises to say, hey, what would I do? Because and I know in our local SWAT team, super high standards, super squared away. We've had women on the team. We've also had like really smaller stature dudes on the team. And I think that to that point, like if you have an appropriate test, people want to see what the ability of the officer is. And that's not necessarily like this in the box, hey, lift this much or do this many reps of something. It's like have a minimum standard, right? So they have a minimum pull-ups, they have minimum these things where like just the big huge guy, if he doesn't have relative strength and grip strength and can manipulate his own body weight, then yeah, pull-ups are going to be an issue. However, it's not something that someone can't overcome with some training and maybe recognizing, hey, I actually do have to lose some weight to make this test work or to be at my best. And also there's shooting that requires shooting and moving and shooting after, like stress shooting, right? Like after some physical intensity, endurance activity, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So when you talk about early on in the academy, like you have kind of, as you put, the typical cop with his gut hanging out over his belt. I think that that's so rough because it's typical, but then I know exactly what you're saying, and I think that most cops would recognize that like there is that archetype, whether you're in or out of law enforcement. And then this person is a leader. And essentially, what we're doing by having leaders is showcasing whether we really intend to or not, but we're saying, hey, this is more of what we want you to be. If this person's in a position of power and authority and influence, like we are by proxy saying, be more like this person and we're gonna come off great. Yeah, I think it's such an impactful way to start the real narrative and kind of sharing a lot of your experience in law enforcement. And I just kind of want to focus on that and just ask people to reflect on that a little bit on their own, because it's like, man, we have these examples all over the place, and this isn't to disparage, but this is just to say, hey, we need to have a culture that holds a higher account of not just every individual, but individuals to support each other, to say, hey, we need to make sure our whole team is dialed in and proficient, whether you're on a desk or whether you're over here. But it's just part of the package. If you're going to put a uniform on and walk around with a gun on your hip, like you have to be able to do certain things to help protect lives, and that's your own included.
Yeah. I tried to get as descriptive as I could with detailing some of those individuals who become somewhat characters in the book. But it's because every agency, everybody knows one of them. Like of the different characters that
Yeah.
I lined out, like everybody knows at least one of those types of people. So it was fun to get a little descriptive with it, because then like your own image of who that person is comes to mind as you're reading it back. But yeah, that gets frustrating as somebody who wants to see the best of the profession, and you see the people who fit the description of the chief who looks like he hasn't been on patrol in 10 years and he's about 50 pounds overweight, and you're like, just looking at it, I'm like, I feel like you're so out of touch with what
Mm.
we do on patrol. Like, when's the last time you've been in a patrol car, like even for a ride along type of thing, you know? And that's just like, that's kind of like people walk in, they have their energy, they have their vibe, you know, it's like a first impression type of thing. I had an interview with the chief once before starting the academy, but then when he walks in, it's kind of just like you're sitting back trying to take it all in, not trying to be judgmental, but I mean, hindsight's 2020, kind of looking back
Yeah.
of what I saw on that day versus what happened following that. I mean, you kind of see how it goes down a less than positive path sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that example, for a couple reasons, and what you just said about, like, being out of touch, like, that can take a lot of forms. And even when you said, like, "Hey, like, are they street ready? Do they even know what's going on the street?" Or, like, "How about a ride along?" And I think that's, like, a really low-hanging fruit. I think that responsibly, we shouldn't expect our superiors to do our job. Like, we all have a different job, right? And I like talking about that for the purpose of building empathy and, like, this same teamness. Again, like, it's, hey, like, we have one police culture. Like, let's do what we can to uplift each other and make each other better, not all this infighting that I feel like it's so much in the way of progress. But even to that point, like, I love the let's just say, like, that archetype of a more senior administrator that's like, man, this job is so different, but I'm gonna ask questions. I'm gonna invite and welcome people to come talk to me about what they're seeing, what their frustrations are, and I'm gonna get in a car, right? Like, maybe I'm not gonna shag calls because I could see how that can actually cause more ripples and more work for people. You might not be up to date exactly on the tactics, and I know as I say that, a lot of people are like, "Well, that's a problem itself too." But let's just get baby steps, and I think that a lot of that's just observe, be present. You might not want, a certain administrator taking, like, the primary role in this really dynamic situation. Like, if we're going to be fair, they don't have the reps that you have as, like, a veteran officer with a handful of years. But absolutely, if that administrator showed up and said, "Hey, what can I do to help? Can I cover this angle on a building search? And can I take a statement from this person?" I think that most people would accept. And if you're not and you're apprehensive, then think about what you're doing to either contribute towards the positive culture or this negative one where it's us and them. So, um, I just want to say that because I think that there's so many people that are listening that are going to be those future leaders, whether they're going to be sergeants, whether they're going to be administrators. If you have that in your mind to just try to show up where you can fit it in or make it a priority in these little ways, I think it makes such a difference.
Yeah, so it's interesting seeing two sides of that same coin because the municipal agency I was at, there was one captain I had who would respond to calls. Well, there's more than there's a couple there. I take that back. There was a couple who would come out and respond to
Hmm.
calls, but then there were a handful that you'd never see. But when I made the switch, I left the full time agency and went back to a part time state agency. That agency I'm still employed with. All of their admin is out working at least a couple of times a year, and that's the chief included. Granted, it's during like high call times and busy times, but it's interesting when you hear them key up on the radio to know
Mm,
that they're out working. Um,
yeah.
and of course, it's the same culture where we try to make sure they don't take a report or we'll come snag something for them, like just like general type stuff. But it's like, hey, chief needs something, let's go, and we'll go handle it for it, even if he's like it's his call, it's main point of contact. It's just cool to see them out working with you. And also it removes like the thin, like invisible barrier too between like you and them. It's
Hmm.
like we're all out doing the same job. Like you still have that utmost respect for any rank that they have, but at the same time it's like we're still a team, like out here working together. And so it's a lot easier to have those conversations and kind of things go up the chain as easy as they come back down. And it's like a much more positive teamwork style environment that way too.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. We've had all these new forms. I feel like there's a lot of change everywhere. And a lot of it's really good. It just feels like, for the ground troops, it feels like it's all the time and all at once. And so I want to be sympathetic to that. And I haven't been in quote unquote admin too long, but I think about it all the time. I talk to my sergeants daily. I talk to multiple officers weekly, and so I get it. And I'm trying to do what I can to help, like, make that as smooth a process as possible. All to say, um, when I did go on a call and it was a domestic and it required this new form and this new way to document things, like I was on board with how it was a bit clunky, but just trying to be part of it. And I recognized, and one of my sergeants clowned me on it in front of the crew, which I also appreciated because it came clearly from a place of trust. If they were going to bring it up to me and kind of razz me about it, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, because I didn't do it all right. Like it was going super slow. It was the first time I saw it. And then, whereas the form was like fine when I referenced it back in the main report, like I didn't have the verbiage that I've literally been asking people to do because it's one more thing, right? But like, one, it's a piece of humble pie for me. And also, it just made me grounded. It helped me recognize that when you have all these things going on, it's not in a vacuum. Like, you lose track of things because you have so much to do and you have a lot of calls. And then you have this other thing pop up and you're trying to balance these things swirling around your brain. Whereas, not dissimilarly, like I had my administrative roles and tasks for the day. And then I was trying to get this case report done because there was an arrest and I had to get it done quick. And so, just like them, I had this pressure and I forgot because we're all human. But I share that because, one, I think that we all ought to share our mistakes. That's part of the point of things. But then I think about that frequently and I bring it up with some of my officers to say, like, no, I get it. Like, I'll own it too. Like, I've totally forgot. So how can we help all of us not forget these things, right? Is it a different type of checklist? Is it having some time allocated? Like, do we need more reminders? And what do those even look like? And trying to find some solutions that way.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely always evolving, and it is. I think I used to be one of them, and I know my husband was when you're trying to go to sleep at night, and you're like, oh, I forgot this one thing. You look down
Yeah.
at the report, or stuff like that.
Yeah. So we talked about a lot of things, and my apologies for zigzagging. I just get excited about, like,
You're good.
I'm like squirrel, like something you say. But I did make a note that early on you shared in your book that you had already established a counselor, and I love that trend. I hope it's a trend, but we're talking about the same thing in our agency where we're saying, hey, we want to introduce you to this counselor, whether or not you ever contact her again. That's cool with us. But if you should want to contact someone, and since you've talked to her and you feel good about it, you know where to go. And then you don't like feel like she's the person for you. At least you've talked to a counselor and you know kind of that it's not super scary. And you know that you can find a different one through any of these veins. So I appreciate you sharing that. Maybe what are your thoughts on that, as especially as we have talked about all these different kind of competing stressors and how to integrate police work and then your normal day-to-day life and your off-duty life.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a huge advocate of having a counselor in your corner, and as soon as I moved to the Tulsa area, I found one to start working with, and I think it's a great thing to have somebody who is like neutral opinion, even somebody who's outside of law enforcement, which it in my case, I get a chuckle out of it sometimes having to explain, you have to explain how things work versus maybe what you see on CSI and stuff like that. So we chuckle about kind of informing her of what the police ways are. But I mean, it's the same thing. It's like, it's just a completely detached person, completely out of the police world, completely out of your personal life. And so to me, the value in having that third party is just fantastic because they don't have any ties to any of your personal life, any of your work life, any of your coworkers, any policies or procedures or anything like that. It's just she was really good at me at like throwing, it's kind of like reflecting back to you what you just said, and then also making sure that everything aligns of, well, you said you want X, but then you did Y. That doesn't match up. Like, let's look at that type of thing. So it's very much of
Hmm.
like calling you out type of thing. Um,
Yeah. It sounds like
but
an objective point of view, right?
yeah, yeah, very objective. Like nothing emotional, subjective tied to it necessarily. So I think it's a great thing to have a counselor in your corner for the good, the bad, the indifferent. Because, and again, the way I like to teach this in my classes too is we're very reactive when it comes to mental health. It's oh, the critical incident happens and then we go get counseling, instead
Mm.
of perhaps if we had our systems in place, like we had our counselor in place, we had our self-care techniques in place with sleep, we're walking, we're journaling, we're doing any of those things that fill our cup. If we had that in place before, I'd be willing to bet, and again, everyone processes things differently, but I'd willing to bet that you might be able to process or work through that critical incident a little bit quicker, or maybe a little bit better, for lack of better terms, because you were proactive about it versus being reactive. And this may or may not be a good analogy, but it's like you wouldn't go to the gun range and learn to shoot after you've been shot at.
Mhm.
Hopefully,
Yeah. Yeah.
hopefully.
I think that is a great example. That's why it's baby steps, right? Like you go
Yeah.
super slow. I mean, how hopefully everyone listening that is in law enforcement can recall like a very slow, tedious introduction of like fundamentals, like what are the different components? Okay, what are the four universal safety rules? Like it wasn't just like, all right, throwing you into the deep end, here's a gun, it's already loaded, like let's go. Like, we got to take this super seriously, so we got to take the time and attention to do that. I think a lot of people have heard this allegory, like the example of like redlining an engine, right? And how
Hmm.
you want to you want to be able to toggle down, you want to you want to take your car to the mechanic regularly, right? Just to make sure everything's dialed in. You don't want to be expecting, let's just say, your patrol car. Like if you're not going through regular maintenance, oil changes, all that stuff, and then you're in a high speed pursuit and it's pushing 90, 100, and you're trying to negotiate these turns and dumping speed here and there, like these hairpin turns, like, and even to expand on that, like, I mean, we've all heard that kind of allegory of like redlining your engine. We can't use this car for this purpose anymore. If we take care of the things we can take care of before they happen, that will give us our best opportunity to make sure that we can continue to do what we need to do or what we want to do. So, Monica, in your book, Thriving Inside the Thin Blue Line, you talk about how you've encountered a lot of challenges. And I don't want to be a spoiler to too many things. That's personalities, that's like toxic leadership, that's being sidelined, injury, right? And so, navigating a lot of these things. Can you share with us what prompted you to write the book, for one, and then two, start your company to help others build these systems for wellness?
Yeah, so the business came before the book. As I was going through some of those challenges, I was looking for another employer essentially. I was ready to get out, and I had been applying to several different positions and several different jobs, and it was one of those things where it just wasn't lining up. Um, I got down to one of the final two applicants for like a criminal. You talk about going back to that criminal justice and bubble. I was going back to like a criminal justice instructor type position for a VOTEC here locally, and I was one of the final two, and they chose the other person. It wasn't panning out, and things were just snowballing at this point. And it was one of those things where it's like, well, I started the company in January of 22, and was working part time on my company, and then working full time PD, and then finally in April, when I was ready to leave the police department, my business picked up and went full time by that point, so I was able to jump and make the switch. Essentially, what I do with 50 Fierce and Fit is I create online nutrition and fitness programs for female first responders that has nutrition, coaching, fitness programming, accountability, and mindset. I've been doing that full time since April of 2022. Probably coached one on one at least about 200 women by now,
Wow.
and maybe up to 400 or 500, just with like different challenges and not like other things helping them, and not necessarily just one on one stuff, group coaching type models that I do every once in a while throughout the year. So I started into that, and had been doing that, and then call it whatever you believe in, a God thing, a universal thing, an energy type thing. I kept getting it thrown back in front of me, like these ads to write a book. And it would come up in
Mm,
conversation with people of, you need to write a book. And finally, it came up so much that I was like, this is a sign. Apparently, this is something that needs to happen. And everything aligned when I found Adam Davis, who was my book coach, and is a good business mentor if you've ever heard of him. And he's written several books and is an awesome public speaker for law enforcement. So I coupled up with him and began writing the book. And I realized as I got through the book, it was a big part of my healing journey. And I think that's where it came from, if you want to call it the coincidence or from God to write the book, that it was a big part of my healing journey, because reliving those specifics of what happened, some parts were harder than others to write, but once I got through a lot of the tougher parts, it was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders.
yeah.
And so, and at the same time too, it was trying to write from a place of healing, not from a place of being bitter and still being scorned. So it was walking me through that process essentially of trying to be very, very factual, like very somewhat unbiased, but putting out the facts and then letting you make your own opinion type of thing of what happened. Um, and working through that. So that's kind of all of how all of that came about.
I've heard some people say that writing a book has been one of the most crazy or intense or extensive labors of love. What are your thoughts on that type of reflection, or do you have anything else that jumped out at you from that process?
So I've always enjoyed writing, and it comes pretty easily to me. And so writing the book was not necessarily the challenge in of itself. And towards the back of the book, I talk about the chronic stress and those health effects that it had on me and some of the things I'm still working through. I think that was the biggest challenge was still trying to work through some of those health issues. And also trying to get such a big project done as a book. So, like, literally healing in so many ways and still healing physically. But mentally and physically while working through the book and that narrative and getting that.
Yeah. When you're writing, and I can sympathize with some of what you said, as far as like processing. I think that's a lot of why I got into writing some of the things or sharing some of my reflections on social media or in articles is for that outlet, right? It's a two-part thing. It's one, recognizing that I can process some of my own thoughts and feelings through an experience, but then also being able to share that in hopes that it could help others in that way. So that's been super rewarding. At the same time, there's been certain topics that I've started down and not really intending to publish or anything, but writing some of these early experiences, right? Maybe it was an awful dynamic with a coworker or a boss or something like that. Um, but I've had reservations continuing because it is pretty intense work, when you're reflecting on your thoughts back then and you try to move past it, right? So I can I'm sharing that own perspective of mine because you share some pretty personal things, these really frustrating accounts to read about, like, this trainer kind of figure, and how unprofessional is a very light way to put it, as you depict in the book. Like, what were some challenges that you had as you process that and you're like, well, I'm going to put this out there for the world to read? And I imagine, tell me if I'm wrong, but people that worked around you, they read that, they're going to know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, since getting out of that department, I can honestly count on one hand, maybe less, of people who I still talk to there.
Yeah.
And those would be the only people who would genuinely still want to support me and actually read the book. So I'm not really concerned about who else gets their hands on it. If they, I mean, it's public. If they want it, they can have it. But it's not. I mean, it was never written for them. I just forgot your main question and point in there.
No, I really like that. I'll just focus on that what you just said. Like, it was never written for them. I think that that's really helpful for anyone listening, because anyone listening may or may not have anything to do with writing their accounts or social media or anything like that. But it is part of this theme that comes up every so often of, like, I don't say totally ignore your haters, because I think that it's a way that you can stay grounded and make sure, like, you can affirm what you're doing and further validate your mission and your why, but you're not doing it for them. And I love that, because there's a lot of ways that that same theme can manifest, right? It's someone being this kind of cop that does this kind of work and does really high quality work, and then people are complaining that they take too long because they like to shortcut and stuff. They're like, cool, I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for my person is the victim here, and my audience may be the junior officers that are watching how I'm doing it as a 3 to 5 year cop, so they don't cut corners, so you are setting the right example. So I love to highlight that, and I love how you brought that up in your answer, because it has to be for you and it has to be for quote unquote your audience, and we all have these different audiences that we're focusing on, whether it is the victim, the community member, or like your peers, and you're trying to lead up in this really powerful way.
Yeah. So for me, really, when I thought about writing this, it was very nerve wracking in the sense to think of who, kind of like you alluded to, of who would read this and why, but more of like, I guess, being on eggshells kind of about those people we talk about who get a hold of it, but at the same time, it's not for them. The whole reason I wrote it is because a lot of us in law enforcement, which this may apply more to women than men, but I know there's guys that experience the same issues that I wrote about. It's more of validating it and calling it out and creating a platform to say, This is not just a part of the job. This is not just something that we have to accept because it's police and, well, buckle up because that's just how it is. You should expect all of this other stuff piled on top of what is actual being a police officer. You know, we hear about the trauma that comes with the critical incidents. We hear about the types of people we deal with. We hear about the tragedies that we will see and forever be imprinted in our brain that we can't get rid of. And you hear some of the gripes and groans and complaints about admins and good, bad, and different. But the only time you hear about the negatives about the police world is in a meme on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows it happens. Everybody wants to joke about it and make fun of it, but no one actually wants to call it out and say, this is no longer okay. This is something that we need to change about our environment. Everybody wants to talk about, well, my life sucks because my admin's terrible. Well, how do you fix that? How do you fix that? It starts from an individual level. It starts from saying, okay, tomorrow I'm going to show up as the best version of myself. Well, that's a big thing to take a bite out of. What does that mean? What does that really mean? Me showing up as the best version of myself. Well, let's start by focusing on what we can control. What's within my direct control? My attitude, my sleep, my self-care, my nutrition, my exercise, my mental health, my attitude. Those are things I can control. Because guess what? It's like the annoyingly happy person in the morning who you're just like, oh my God, shut up. I haven't had my coffee yet. If you
Mm-hmm.
have somebody who shows up that's just like always in a good mood, like positive, always happy, it catches on.
Mm-hmm.
It slowly catches on. And if you can even be a positive role model for just one person, it starts that snowball effect. But it also starts with some of those things that I wrote in the book of like saying, okay, well, this is not okay, but how can we work to fix it? How can we work to fix it? Is it something that I can control with my department where I see there's a light at the end of the tunnel? Or maybe is it, this is really bad. Maybe I need to find a better environment for myself before I go too far the wrong direction for me and my personal goals and my health and what I see for my career and my life.
Yeah. That you said so much there, and I love it. And really, it's harkening back to earlier in the conversation where it's just like this calling out or calling up of this accountability of team, right? Because you're right. Like the memes exist because they're rooted in some truths, right? Some stereotypes that exist in every police department, right? There's always that guy or that gal or that leader or that beat slug, right? There's all these dynamics. There's always this pressure and this like too much to do, and then the blanket emails, and like I get it. Like, and a lot of times I'm a part of it too. I'm a part of adding that organizational stress by default of what I do now. At the same time, we can all we can all complain, we can all whine, we can all vent and just make every roll call like this just like festering pool of toxicity where we all have to be honest. Like, I've said before, sometimes venting feels good for a moment, but then even then I feel like if it's something that's already been vented, I would actually submit that it doesn't make you feel better. I think that it all drags us all down, right? So what are you doing about it? Because as an officer, I honestly thought that the sergeants, like, they were the bee's knees, they could fix everything. I thought it wasn't really the top. Like, I thought, we all had a role to play, but the sergeants could really shape and maintain culture. And then as a sergeant, I thought it was command staff. I thought it was the upper management, right? Because I'm like, well, I think I'm doing all the right things, and so on, right? Now that I've gone to a commander level, I think it's the line. I think it's the line of the sergeants that drive the bus. They're doing the everyday work. How they show up for each other is how their job is going to feel, regardless of what I say or don't say. I know I have a huge influence in that, but maybe that's recognition that we all have a huge influence in that, like how we show up. And we could literally waste tons of energy and angst and bring that stuff home with us. Like, we can sully our whole days on and off of work if we just let ourselves sit there. Or we could be positive about it and focus on what you can control. So I'm very much of that vein. Sometimes I say I have to fight to get myself back in that mindset, but I really love how you put that all out, because I think that that is the secret stuff, and it's no secret. It's just focus on what you can, do the best you can, support those around you, and that will expand outward from there.
Yeah, I think it becomes a big snowball effect, or in theory, it's like saying a rising tide lifts all ships.
Yeah.
I think it starts on the individual level, but and that's what I preach, and that's what I help encourage my coaching clients of the change starts with you, but you have to make, like, that's your decision to make today. am I going to do something different, or am I going to deal with the same hamster wheel I've been stuck on forever, which is me being miserable, me not liking what I see in the mirror, me feeling stuck, feeling like I'm stuck in this job, and I'm counting down like the minutes and the days until I can retire.
Mm-hmm.
That's not living.
It's a
That's
terrible
not
way to
living.
go about it. Yeah. Yeah. And I get really sad. Like I don't blame people for getting there and all these contributing factors to make them count down literally the days, the hours, the minutes, but that's like not I don't want that for anyone, right? And so anything we can do to get out of that, just be more positive and not just like fluffy, like happy just to do it, but no, like let's have tangible conversations, not just vent, not just you know, call out the boss, say, "Hey, this is wrong." Okay, like let's rather than doing that, as you know, like tends to make people defensive. Let's think about concrete things that we can all bring to the table. Like, what are some creative, constructive things that we can do to build forward and onward? So, yeah, thank you so much, Monica. I mean, it's been a fantastic conversation. Brass tacks of having the right systems in place to help navigate this career, the stressors, so you can kind of live your best, and you've shared so many lessons and tangible takeaways that you have been sharing with all your coaching clients. Is there anything that you'd like to leave the audience with before you wrap? And then please tell folks where they can find you, get in contact with you, and where they can find your book.
Yeah, so just a quick ad. I'm also an instructor for a company called Leo Den, and we just rolled out my Fit for Duty course, which is for law enforcement and first responders. It's not specific to women. It's for everybody. So although I keep my one-on-one coaching program for females and for female first responders, we do have an 8-hour course now that's for law enforcement. So it's all similar information. It's just pivoted different to who I'm talking to a little bit. So if anyone is looking for that information and wants to chat with us, you can host a course and get with us. And that's Leoden. So www.leoden.com. As far as my final thoughts, it's kind of like what we've been talking about. I mean, it's up to you to decide how you want your career to go and how you want your life to go, and that decision starts now. Um, I'm always in your corner to help listen if you want to message me and vent, or you really want some help with improving your physical fitness, your mental health, your nutrition, whatever goals it are that you have that you want to work towards. I'm here for that as well. But my main thing I say, if I can curse on here, my loving kick in the ass to everybody
You're
is
fine.
to
Yeah,
get
you're good.
is
That's a
to
very
get up.
that's a very light diet curse word.
Yes, we're cops, right? We've heard it all. But my very loving kick in the ass is just to recognize where you're at. I mean, if you're not where you want to be in your career right now, you're not stuck. And you can absolutely change that trajectory where you do find fulfillment in the career again, where you do get to the day where you're excited to jump out of bed and go to work and not tread your ass to work anymore. You can find that fulfillment outside of life where you're enjoying your hobbies again, where you have that time off duty, where you can be present for your family. You can do all of that. And I feel that I'm a great person that can help you with that as far as teaching those techniques and figuring out how to make that work for you and how to make those lifestyle changes so it fits for you. So know that you're not stuck, but it takes a decision today to make a choice and change those things.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, whatever your mindset is, whatever you're telling yourself, you're absolutely right. So if you're not happy with where you're at, but you can get it back, like one day at a time, whether it's what you're putting in your body, whether it's what you're consuming as far as like media or books or influences, whether it's who you're surrounding yourself with, um, what you're doing with your off time. Are you getting outside, throwing that beanie on as we get into beanie season and getting some work in, or are you just disconnecting? Are you actually thinking and telling yourself, no, I'm out of shape and I'm not going to get back, it's insurmountable? Are you telling yourself, hey, I'm a cop, I have no real tangible skills, I don't even want to do this job? But whatever you say to yourself, you're absolutely right. You're fulfilling that by virtue of telling yourself that and what you're choosing to do with your day to day. So um yeah, Monica's absolutely right. She's got a lot of content out there, so you know how to find her. Look in the show notes. she's there for you. I'm here for you. Like, that's the whole point why I love introducing other first responders uh, for their anecdotes, but also coaches, because some people need coaching. As I was messaging somebody that I did in a group coaching, kind of just checking back in and seeing where he's at with his desired progress into law enforcement. He's like, man, I'm stuck. Like, in the group coaching, things were great. I had accountability, and I just don't have those positive circles, or that kind of, that ongoing support that was getting me the progress I needed. Cool. Like, we all need tools and resources. Some of us need very different things. And so that's where, you know, he needs that kick in the ass. So, as you put it,
Yep.
so I'm kicking him in the ass. So, all to say, there's so many opportunities and resources. That's what it's all about. I do have to shout out for your cat dog back there. That's popped up a
I
couple times.
Yes, they're hanging
Yeah.
out with
Oh,
me today.
okay. Yeah, I can see. Like, first, I thought it was like,
It's
what is
she's
he
a
or she jumping up on? And it was super
witness.
nimble. Yeah, I have a cat dog as well. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Monica, for all your time, supportive information for the audience, and I'll be excited to see what you're building and working on next.
Yeah, absolutely. Best way to find me is it's 50fearsoandfit.com. If you punch that in your URL, it'll give you a prompt to download my shift work nutrition guide, which is a quick, easy guide for you to get your hands on that'll help you with just some initial nutrition tips and how to make it fit for shift work. And that can be for anybody, men, women, whoever feels like they need it. And that's probably the quickest way to get in touch with me too, because then you'll have my email.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Monica.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.